Perfect.
Yeah. And well, the way I wanted to start is like I I was very intrigued as I was going through like my notes for this conversation, with the idea of how someone like you starts to write a book after what was it, like 4 years, 5 years after your first book, after Black Sheep.
Yep.
So like, what's the process like of getting to like write a new book, but like not necessarily like the technical parts of it, but like what led you to choose momentum as a topic to write a new book? Because the first one was about life values, and then this one is about a more not necessarily unrelated topic, but like it's another different topic that can be connected back to
Sure.
values. But like, what was the story of that?
So for me, I wrote Black Sheep. It came out in 2020. And as I was sort of dealing and talking through the launch of that book and watching the success of people wanting to discover what mattered most to them, I ended up losing my son, Theo, to a combination of cancer and COVID once the pandemic hit. And it sort of put me in a ditch for a good 18 months. I sort of removed myself from the world and wanting to engage with anyone or anything during that time. And, when you write a book, it has to start first with inspiration, right? And that's what gets you going. And so I had zero inspiration after suffering the loss of a child. It is not anything I would wish on anyone, and it's something that everybody grieves at their own pace, right? And so you have to sort of figure out what works for you, but you can't just stay there and wait. And so fortunately for me, I've got a sort of an inner circle of friends that have carte blanche to say anything they want to me. And I will take it at face value and know that they're not, trying to hurt me in any way, shape, or form. And one of my buddies came to me and said, "Look, I know you've been through something horrible. We all, sort of suffered it with you." And he said, "I want you to know what I believe, and I hope this helps you." He said, I believe that when you die, you really die twice. The first is when you take your last breath, but the second is when your name is spoken for the last time." And he said, "So what I want to know is, what are you doing to make sure Theo's second life outlives his first? Because the wallowing is not going to get that done." And that was hard to hear. I was still grieving. But it had been 18 months, and they were nervous for me because I wasn't myself. I was sort of put myself on an island and detached from everyone and everything. And so, that sort of was the kick in the pants that I needed to get back and engaged in life. But I didn't have it in me to just say, "Oh, okay, well now everything is okay now, and I'm going to just move forward." So, the only thing I could commit to was the moment I was in, and just, I will be fully present in the moment that I'm in, and I'll try to maximize that moment as much as I can. And that's all I have in me. And if it's successful, great. If it's not, there'll be another moment that happens sometime during the day that I will re-engage again. And so the process of me sort of working through the loss of Theo and re-engaging in life is what became the idea and inspiration for this book. I think that a lot of people, when you look at long-term goals and long-term plans, we get dissuaded pretty easily because life happens. And when life happens, it throws a wrench into your plans. And so for me, this was a completely different approach to achieving a long-term goal. Instead of this, I'm going to work 6 months and I'm going to look back and see where I'm at. And I'm going to, in the corporate world, you have these gates, right? So I have a 90-day gate and then a 6-month gate and then a 9-month gate. And I'm going to walk through those gates with my manager, and we're going to look and see if I'm on path and on target to hitting the goals that were established for me at the beginning of the year. That process is dead, in my opinion. It does not work that way any longer. There's too much uncertainty in the world, and uncertainty is going to wreak havoc on your plans. And so when you shift to something that I call in the new book momentum, can you focus on the moment you're in and create enough momentum in a single moment to catapult yourself towards your goals? If you can do that, you'll often find that the goal you set for yourself isn't big enough. And so that was the inspiration for the new book and what it dives into.
About this idea of momentum, this is actually what I told you that I wanted to share with you about like my philosophical reflections about momentum when I was in Southeast Asia. So like basically, in almost 1 year ago, I was in Bali in September, and I was like just backpacking. I was solo backpacking, and then I was having a lot of time for reflection, and like I was able to start reflecting on these experiences that I told you I was like having like a year and like 18 months before that. So like over that process, like just really reflecting on like the person I was becoming, who I was as an entrepreneur, who I was as a friend, who I was as son, who I was like for myself and for my vision, because I hadn't really been disciplined in any way with my like projects and like vision and like this path of mine, but because that was a choice. So I made this choice to like just explore, like to not have a defined path for those things, but to really just live, and then later on use, so like later on is like right now for example, use those experiences to shape this path for myself. And so in when I was in Bali, I was having a lot of time for reflection about those things. Like one that came to me was first like on the personal side, and then that turned into like the career side, or into the like yeah creation side, into the project side of what I do. And so it was like, okay, maybe let's not focus on the things that I have been doing for me to develop the projects that I want to develop, or to create a network or whatever. Let's just focus on who I am as a person first, and then like start from there to see how I am acting in life. And so I was trying to think that there were many moments, there had been through this 2 years, like many moments in which I was just like reacting to things. I wasn't really like present to have a space before responding to something, and to choose how I would be like, what that would mean for me, and for who I am. And so that led me to think like, okay, how I choose to respond in this moments has not necessarily been in different times who I think I am, or that doesn't represent what I want for me in my life. And so that was like a first reflection of like, okay, I need to build like I think I call it, yeah, like because momentum is your word. I call it, because I'm getting mixed with terms right here, but yeah, it was no momentum alignment. Because I was like, okay, I gotta be aligned with the moment, and also that alignment with the moment will lead me to be aligned with the momentum that I want to create for me, and the momentum that I create for me will be aligned with the vision that I have for myself. And so that was like a first reflection that I had as I was there, and as I was living like new experiences. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe sometimes during like the previous months traveling with my friends, I was not very understanding with them at some times, or I was not very intentionally helpful with them, or trying like just to be there for them. And so I was in this expedition in Bali, and then they were still traveling together, so I left early, and like they call me and they say, do you still have like the bus discounts that they gave us like two months ago when we lost this bus, and when we had this bus delayed. And I was like, oh yeah, sure, but I didn't have like a proper Wi-Fi connection, so I was like just running around the place I was in, trying to find a place with connection to send them the things. So that was like a way for me to start uh, reassuring this new concept that I was trying to live by, like momentum alignment, which meant what I already described. And so that was like a first time when I was like really just starting to think about the importance of how how being intentional in different moments creates momentum towards the life that you want to live. Because like as I was sharing, like these 2 years were a first experience for me to actually live many of the things that like I was reading about in books like yours, in books like Black Sheep. And so that was like a moment when I realized, and like it with my own experience, like, oh, okay, this is how I build momentum, like moments by moments. And that's like brick by brick being building that alignment to that vision, and really just like moving forward. um so what I'm going to with this is like, what do you think is like the importance of moments like that, of like the decisive moments to build momentum, and like also what is the importance of momentum in life?
So, I think what you're describing is, for me, you got a couple of things when it comes to momentum. The first is sort of a mindset shift that has to happen, and that is approaching challenges by asking, "What if there was a way?" Right? I call it WITWA, right? WITWAW. It's a WITWA mindset, which stands for "What if there was a way?" Our brains are wired for certainty. They want certainty at all costs. What they don't care is if you're certainly right or certainly wrong. They just want to be certain. And I think that's, as a larger framework, if you look at the division in the United States right now, I think you see a lot of this coming to life. Our brains want certainty. What it doesn't care about is if we're certainly right or certainly wrong. So you get a little bit of that on each side of the aisle, where people just crave that certainty to a point where they don't ask themselves, is this right or wrong? They just want to be certain. And so when we approach things by asking, what if there was a way? What we're doing is we are telling our brain that we want to search for potential solutions. What if there was a way? What if there was a way for this to happen? So in our brain's need for certainty, it starts to look for those solutions that we can be positive and optimistic about, as opposed to the probable failure that could also happen on the other side of the coin. So when we start looking at situations, you have two choices. What if there was a way to make it happen? Or the minute you're negative about it or talk about how it potentially could fail, your brain is going to do everything it possibly can do to confirm and be certain about that too. So if it's negative, it's going to try to be negative no matter what you want it to be. It's going to try to confirm that negativity. So it's why we have to be intentional. Black Sheep talked so much about deliberate intention. And it's the same with this. You need to be intentional with your mindset by approaching things in a positive, optimistic way of asking, what if there was a way, changes everything.
It reminds me of what we discussed in the first podcast that we recorded, like this part of like being uncertain or being certain, but like that the brain wants to be like one or the other. It reminds me of like that thing you shared in that first podcast that we recorded, which was like, we are always seeking connection. And so like when people can't find connection with like the people around them, so like their family or colleagues in school or work or whatever, they end up seeking connection somewhere else. And like many times what happens, and you were sharing that like radical groups leveraged that connection that people seek to really have them be part of the group, because it's like a way to leverage that part of like human psychology of wanting to connect with something. So that was one of the biggest lessons that I had when I was doing my past show, and also probably the biggest lesson from that podcast that we recorded. And it sounds similar to this thing that you were saying about like being certain. So it's like here it's not necessarily about connecting with people. It's about connecting with vision for the future. Whether that vision is like, okay, everything will be great and all right, and then like, oh no, everything will not be all right. So we gotta be like very pessimistic. But it's like one or the other. Um, I would like you to guide us through this process that you share in your new book about like reframing moments with uncertainty into like thinking like, yeah, what if everything was all right? Like, what would be such a scenario? Like, get us through how that looks for a person to be able to build momentum for their life.
Well, the first step is to whatever challenge or goal that you've set for yourself is to ask exactly that question. What if there was a way to make this happen? Right. And so your brain starts to search for potential solutions and paths to get there. And as you're working through those things, you're going to face uncertainty. We all do. And that's part of why, I argue in this new book that the path to the 5-year plan is dead, because uncertainty happens so often today, and it's so prevalent in the world that it can render your plans moot before the ink is dry on the paper. So we have to focus moment to moment in order to pivot and make changes when we need to stay on path and continue towards the goals we want to achieve. Uncertainty has the tendency to push us into survival mode, right? Because when something uncertainty happens, again, that brain's need for being certain can flip to the other side and be negative and be like, oh my gosh, now all of a sudden the end of the world is happening and what am I going to do? But, what I talk about is I believe there is a hidden gift inside of survival mode. And that's that it forces you to focus on the moment you're in. Like that is what survival mode is. You can only deal with the moment you're in because you don't have the capacity to deal with anything else. You're too overwhelmed. And so when we focus on the moment we're in, we recognize there is so much power in the moment we are in to change what's possible. We just have to stay in that moment and make our decisions in that moment and not worry about what the future holds or what the past has already done to us, right? The first book, the first chapter in the book talks about mental time travel and how we spend the majority of our time either projecting ourselves into the future or beating ourselves up over the past. And we are so rarely in the moment itself that's why we don't see any particular change in our lives, is because we're not in the present moment. We are worried about something that hasn't happened yet, and we have all this anxiety of what that's going to feel like. Or we are beating ourselves up and we're depressed over a decision that was already made that we can't change. And so the idea here is when we're in the present moment and we're in uncertainty, what we use to battle that uncertainty is hope. And that's what I think people don't understand. Hope cannot exist without uncertainty. You need uncertainty for hope to exist. If you were certain, there's no need to hope because you would be certain about it, right? So uncertainty travels with hope all the time. And so when we look at hope, we have to ask ourselves, well, what is hope? We try to, a lot of us make it this existential thing that's out there that we can't really put our fingers on. But hope is something really, really simple. It's a combination of 3 things: desires, expectations, and action. So when you talk about momentum alignment, what I'm talking about is aligning desires, expectations, and actions. That's really what you're doing, right? So when you're sitting there and wondering, how am I seeing this momentum happen by aligning it with my vision, my goals, all that sort of stuff, you're projecting out towards the goal. And I'm telling you, in the moment, it's about what you desire, what your expectation is, and what action you're going to take. Those are the 3 things that you control in any moment. What do you desire? What is the expectation that you have in this moment? And then what action are you going to take to make it happen, right? That is how you create momentum. That is how you start the ball rolling and we build from there.
What do you think is, mm, or no, like what's the approach you suggest for choosing how to align desire, expectation, and actions? And I ask this because like I've seen many times like on social media or like read about like this. It's mostly like a stoic thing. Like if you cannot get what you want, you should want what you get. And that's like kind of changing your desire. Many people might be like, okay, why would I change my desire? Why don't I just change the actions that I do and like try to get to that desire and like keep the desire and expectations. Like I think that's a default thing that we many times do, like trying not to change the desire or expectation, and maybe sometimes trying to change actions. But like we many times don't think about like changing our expectations of what should happen or our own desires, because that's uncomfortable because it's like accepting that the reality you thought for yourself is not the way that you projected it to be. So like I think that's where this question comes in. Like, what do you think is a good way to choose what to shift, whether that's like desire or expectation or actions?
So there's a couple of things in that question, right? First is the way that we weasel out of doing this and just changing. Well, all of a sudden I'm going to change what I desire. All of a sudden I'm going to change what my expectations are. We want to do that, but we want to do that with deliberate intention. We don't just want to do it because we didn't get what we wanted, right? Like that's not the reason that you change. So the challenge is that I find with most people, they are not specific when it comes to their desires and expectations. They're just not specific. So when you say, I want to be successful, that's a desire, right? But I'm like, I have no idea what that means. You need to be really specific with me. What do you mean by success? How do you define success? And when we talk about clarity around our desires, that's what we're talking about. You can't just say, I want to, even in this case, I want to make $1 million by the time I'm 30, right? Okay, great. So that's a very specific desire. What are the specific expectations that have to happen in order for you to reach that? Do you think you're going to need to get up early every day? Do you think you're going to need to read books? Do you think you're going to need, what are those expectations that have to exist in order for you to do that? And then what are the expectations after you achieve it or don't achieve it? Right? So that's the other deal. So when we look at things and we state our desires and say, this is I'm going to be really specific with this desire. And then something happens and we don't get what we want. Well, then we're forced to adjust our expectations, right? And so we change our expectations, but we might not necessarily change the entire desire. So for me, if we even look at the loss of my son, right? My desire was obviously for him to survive, but that didn't happen. So how am I going to adjust my expectations now? Because all the expectations I had were destroyed. So now I have to look at that and go, okay, well, my desire is to carry the legacy on. I still want his legacy to be alive. He might not be alive, but I want his legacy to live on. And so my expectations had to shift to this new desire, but the desire is still in alignment with what I initially wanted, just not in the same way, right? Mm-hmm. And so now my actions have to change as well. So now my actions are about making sure that I get people to say his name, because I want his name to live on. I want that second life impact. I want to make sure that all the things that I wrote about in Black Sheep, which were really born out of the struggles that we were watching him battle and figuring out what matters most to you so you can make better decisions in times of crisis. Now my desires, expectations, and actions are back in alignment, even though I didn't get what I wanted in the first place, right? And so those things I am shifting with deliberate intention, right? I'm not just arbitrarily changing because I didn't get what I want. I am absolutely saying, okay, my desire changed, obviously didn't get what I want, but but what if there was a way to continue, right? Here's the question. What if there was a way to continue this even though I didn't get what I want? Well, this is what it looks like now. So now I wrote a new book talking about how I was able to move forward through this and focus on the individual moments. And now I'm helping people define their desires, their expectations, and helping them with taking deliberate action to get to where they want to be, even when life throws a wrench into what it is that you want out of it.
So, how I am thinking about it is like having the black sheep values, so like the core values be like the solid thing from which everything else like comes out, and like having then the desires be like the second layer, the expectations be the third layer, and the actions be the fourth layer. Do you think that's a good way to think about it? Because like actions are usually, I think you can change a lot. Expectations are things that you will change, as you were saying, when things don't happen the way you want them to, for you, the way you want them to happen. And then the desire part is like not necessarily even changing the desire, which is what I was thinking before. Like right now, I'm thinking of it as like reframing it, like really just looking at that from a different perspective, which is what you were saying. Like in your case, you had this idea of like how that desire should have happened, then like this thing that your friend told you, like there are two lives, like that
Yeah,
helped you reframe the
that's right.
desire. But yeah, do you think that that way of putting it, like this four layers, is a good way to frame it, like mentally or
So
conceptually?
I break it into three specific areas, right? And this will be so black sheep is the first layer, momentum becomes the second layer, and my next book will be the third layer, right? And so what this looks like is your values are the first part of it, right? You've got to have clarity of what your non-negotiables are. Your second is you got to own the moments you're in, right? So you got to focus on the moment you're in. And then the third part is you got to keep committed to what it is that you want to achieve. And that's all about managing hope. So the next book is called The Alchemy of Hope. And it's so we know what we care about. Here are non-negotiables. We know how to use those negotiables to own a moment. And now we've got to keep ourselves engaged by managing our hope. Because this is what you find out as you get a little bit older and you get into the corporate world and you start working. The amount of bullshit that you are willing to deal with is directly proportional to the amount of hope that you have. Does that make sense? If you've got a lot of hope that this is where you want to be and this is helping you get to where you want to go to, the level of bullshit you're willing to deal with can be astronomical. But the minute that you lose hope, the tiniest little annoyance will be the straw that breaks the camel's back and you will quit. Right? So it could be, if this is where I know it's putting me towards my path, I will deal with them changing my title. I will deal with them, lowering my salary or changing my income structure. I will deal with all these things because I still have hope that I'm going to get to where I want to be. But if I lose hope and I come into work one day and the coffee is cold, I could go, well, this is bullshit. I'm not working here anymore. They can't even give me hot coffee. I quit. Right? It seems ridiculous, but it's because the proportion, the balance of hope on one side and what your expectations are on the other side are not in balance. And so that's what ends up happening. So when we look at the three pillars of success for me, one is defining your non-negotiables. The second is owning your moments. And the third is managing your hope. If you can do those three things, you will find success no matter what it is you want to do in life, period. If you can't figure out what matters most, you're going to be chasing your own tail forever. If you don't own your moments, you're going to miss opportunities for you to succeed. And if you don't manage your hope, you will never stay committed to anything that you set your mind to. And so those are the three things that have to happen in order for you to find success.
Let's define, or yeah, not less, like I would like you to define like how you think of momentum and how that relates to the way you are thinking about success?
So the book puts forth a framework for building momentum in a single moment, right? What are the components that have to exist in a moment in order for you to create momentum? We call it bump, right? You want to bump the moment forward. And so bump stands for belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose. If you can create those four things in a single moment, then it has the power to push you forward and create momentum. So in its purest form, if I was in a meeting, right, I would ask who belongs in this meeting, right? Is everybody who has stakes in this at the table? Yes. Are there people here who shouldn't be here? Can I have them not participate, right? So who belongs, number one. Understanding, what are we trying to accomplish in this moment? Not at the end of the goal, in this moment, right? Why are we doing this in this moment? Why are we doing it now, right? And then finally, purpose is all about what has to happen next in order for us to achieve that purpose. So when we look at bump as a framework, if I was in a meeting, every meeting should have a bump output. Who belongs? What are we trying to accomplish in this moment? Why are we doing it now? What are the next steps that have to happen in order to achieve the goal, right? That is how you create momentum in a single moment, by bumping it forward, belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose.
How does that look for a moment where you are trying to, a moment that you're trying to make progress in personally without other people? Like they're like the only one belonging might be like you, because it's like you trying to push push something forward that has only to do with yourself. But maybe there you could think about like, oh, okay, what type of thoughts belong here? What type of feelings belong here? What tools belong here? Is that something that should be included in those things?
It can be, for sure, yes. And so, let's say you decide personally you want to lose 30 pounds, right? And that's what it is. So the first thing that I would ask is who belongs in this conversation? Because yes, it's you, but you got to look at who else, who's your accountability partner? Who's going to hold you accountable to what you're doing? So who belongs in this conversation? Does your doctor belong in this conversation? Does your coach belong in this conversation? Does your workout partner belong in this conversation, right? Who belongs in this conversation? Because here's the thing about connection, right? The two most powerful forms of connection that exist are shared values and suffering. That's it. So when you look at those two, if you do not find ways to connect through shared values, you will find ways to connect through suffering. And so when we look at this, you have to know that connection is at the very center of you succeeding no matter what. Nobody achieves shit on their own. They just don't. They might think they do, but they don't. There is somebody else involved somewhere that helped them move forward. And so who belongs in this conversation? Then what specifically has to happen in order for us? What are we trying to accomplish? Here's the clarity of desire, right? This is what understanding is. What, if I'm going to lose 30 pounds, what do I need to do right now? Well, maybe I can cut my portions in half. Maybe I can go for a 15-minute walk. Maybe I can consume 8 ounces of water, right? That's what is the understanding of what has to happen in this moment. Why now? Why are you doing this right now? Well, because maybe the doctor told you that you were on the verge of diabetes, or you got a disease or a potential health risk because you are obese. And then finally, what needs to happen next, right? So again, belonging, understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. So for the understanding in this case, it might be something as simple as the understanding is, in order for me to do this, I really should be trying to lose 2 pounds a week or something like that. That's the understanding of what needs to happen, because I'm not just going to lose 30 pounds tomorrow. So the moment that I'm in says, I need to understand what's possible in the moment. And then the meaning behind why are we doing it now? And then finally, what are those next steps? What are the action that I have to take? And so that is sort of how you would do your own individual, deal of whatever it is you're looking to create momentum for yourself in any particular moment.
Yeah, I like how this framework that you created works for like everything, because like that's the way it should be. Like if it doesn't work for, if it works just for some things, but it's yeah, momentum is something that applies to anything in life, like trying to push something forward. And like if this framework only worked for like the corporate world or whatever, like it wouldn't be as valuable as what you created, which is something that can be used like in any situation. Another thing that I was thinking, and this is like the way I would like to start wrapping up this conversation about momentum. Then I have like some other final questions, but like yeah, about this part about momentum, is that I was having a conversation for the podcast with Nick Hutchison from Book Thinkers. Like what was that, like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and we were discussing this idea of the law of accumulation, which is like momentum is built in both ways. Like if you start going to the gym or exercising like every day in any form, at least 5 minutes a day, like, and you start doing that every day, like momentum builds. Uh, yeah, you build momentum in that way. But like if you stop doing exercise every day, like every day or even just like for 2 days, you're starting to build like negative momentum. What do you think about this idea of like the law of accumulation, of how like momentum accumulates, and like how this bomb framework helps to really be able to build forward momentum instead of negative momentum?
So what I'm going to say is committing to doing something every day is too far out. Right? That's you're not being specific. You're giving me an idea. Yes, if I do something every day, I can build momentum. Yes, that's true. I'm telling you to own your moment. The moment you're in now. So the difference is the idea of doing something every day is very different than bumping the moment you're in. Right? And that's how you need to reframe this, is that if you just go and say, yes, it would be nice if I went to the gym every day, I would lose weight. Yes, if I went to the gym every day, I'd get stronger. Yes, I would be more healthy. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's an idea. That's not an actual plan to own your moment. You gotta focus in the moment you're in, which means as soon as we hang up here and stop this podcast, in the next moment that you're in, what are you going to do to make sure that you keep momentum moving? And that means you have to sit here and go, okay, belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose. So I'll give you a perfect example. When we were looking at this, as you just said, it's something that can be applied to anything, right? So I wanted to apply it to social media. Could I use this to try to create momentum in how many people would see the videos that I would put out? And so I decided that we were going to use, at the time, Taylor Swift had just come out with her new album. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to use this framework and create belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose in a small, short video regarding the launch of this new record, right? Who she included in the belonging, right? So who did she include on this record, of the people that she worked with, the other artists she sang with, the people that she wrote with, the people she mentioned? What was the understanding of what she was trying to accomplish in the moment? Why was she doing it? And what were the steps she did to make it happen? So I would literally include those 4 things in every video that I would record. And what we did was we watched we started on TikTok, and I said, okay, my average views might be 600 to 1,000 views, right? I don't have a big TikTok following. So I was like, okay, let's start there. the very first video that I did and included the bump framework got 400,000 views. So I was like, all right, let's try. Maybe it was a fluke. Let's try it again. I did the same exact thing, included belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose in the next video. Changed what exactly I was talking about, and it got 400,000 views again. And I'm like, okay, so let's switch platforms and let's switch subjects. So I switched to Premier League soccer on Instagram. I talked about Real Madrid, and I talked about them creating belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose with their fans, how they do it. And that got almost 400,000 views on Instagram. So we watched this over and over prove itself that this is what people want. If we can create belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose. And the last part is if we can infuse emotion into it, something that I call ogre moments in the book. An ogre moment is a moment that has an overwhelming gut reaction of emotion. That's your OGRE, right? So ogre moments are viral moments. Every viral moment you've ever seen has been an ogre moment. There's been not just the content of the video, but the emotion attached to it. So is it happiness? Is it joy? Is it anxiety? Is it fear? Is it disgust? What is the emotion attached to the moment itself? That's what creates the ogre moments. And the ogre moments have the most amount of potential to catapult you forward. That takes you from 500 views to 500,000 views because you've got to instill the emotion into it. That's the mass that helps push it forward at a rate that's much faster than just an everyday moment that you might experience.
So emotion is also a big factor for creating big momentum then in every
correct.
moment.
That's right.
I like that.
Ogre moments are they don't happen all the time, but when they do happen, those are the ones that if you recognize it in the moment have the most potential to catapult you forward. What we've discovered on our podcast, Just a Moment, that we've started recently, our guests talk about a single moment in their life that catapulted them forward. And the overwhelming amount of people that we've talked to, the interesting thing was they didn't recognize the moment when they were in it. Right? They just didn't recognize it as being something that was life-changing. It took reflection upon years of experiencing life and going back and realizing that was it. That was the moment. If we can train ourselves to recognize ogre moments when they are happening, then we can take advantage of those moments to push ourselves further towards our goals.
And I think just one other comment on this is that like this ogre moments are not necessarily being like very enthusiastic or like being very happy or joyful or whatever. They might also be like being very like angry or upset or like really being down. Like it's not about only the positive side of like the
Correct.
emotional spectrum. It's like any type of emotion that becomes intense can lead to these moments that create a change because they're finally like more energy provided to you through which you push something forward. And like what is pushed forward, whether that's like in the positive direction or in the negative direction, is like defined whether or not you use this bomb framework and whether or not you define like what the next what the right next step is, which I think that's like a good way to summarize it. Like what is the next right step in this moment, like using the bomb framework for that.
100% agreed.
Cool. Well, yeah, I appreciate all this chat on momentum. Really, this is one of the topics, one of the self-help topics that I really like the most. Also because like I was chatting about like the first time that I had a podcast on this was in 2023 with a DJ friend, and so he's also a physicist, and he was like explaining it with the like physics analogy. Well, no, actually the physics explanation of momentum and using that to explain that like the analogy of momentum for like one's life. And this is really just one of my favorite topics to talk about, because it's also just about like how do we keep moving forward to where we want to go in life. So I appreciate the things you've shared with us. Um, like right now, I would like to start to wrap up the podcast asking you like three standard questions that
Okay.
I ask all of my guests. And so like the first one, you can relate either of them to like the momentum topic
Okay.
and your books, or like to anything that he wants. But
Okay.
like the first is, what is a book, movie, music album, TV series, anything that you have recently watched or consumed that you really enjoyed or found valuable and that you think people should like also check out?
Music wise, I've been listening a lot to Steven Wilson Jr. If you are unfamiliar, he is a force of songwriting and performing right now that has really caught fire in the last, say, year or so. Steven Wilson Jr. is amazing. Books wise, I got my shelf back here as to what I've been reading recently. I've got actually, even Rise of the Reader by our buddy Nick Hutchinson was a great book that's on my shelf back there. And this is a book that I keep with me here all the time called Find Your Red Thread.
Oh, uh-huh.
This is by Tamsin Webster. It talks about how to craft a narrative that's going to resonate with your audience. And so that's something that stays with me all the time because I refer to it constantly as I am crafting narratives either for keynotes or for social media and that sort of thing. So I would say those are the two right now that are on top of mind.
Cool. I actually have that one. I don't have Nick's book, but I do have Find Your Red Thread, because you sent it to me through Bookstar PR in 2021. So I was like just reading through the first pages of it. I didn't really read it fully. But I will, because I mean it's something that is like useful for me right now that I'm building
I use it
this.
for every single talk that I craft. That is the foundation. That's the backbone for how to build
Okay,
an effective talk.
cool. Yeah, I'll read it, and I'll also let you know my thoughts on how I'm using it.
Please.
Then the second thing is like, what is and actually I think that this question I asked to you back in our first podcast, and this is this was a moment when you shared like the power of connection. And like, yeah, what is something that you have learned or discovered recently that you think is like valuable or interesting?
Um, I would say for me, I've been deep diving into hope, right, and how hope works in our lives. Because my next book, that's the center of what we're looking at. And when what I found very very interesting with regards to hope is that in a corporate sense, hope is a four-letter word, right? Nobody wants to talk about hope because how do you track hope? But in reality, when we define hope as desires, expectations, and action, it actually can be tracked. It can be measured. And that is the big aha that I've had recently in writing this next book is I think companies underestimate the impact of hope on a daily basis on the company culture and its ability to perform at a high level. Hope should be the number one thing that they are focused on managing. And instead, it is a distant thought and something that gets frowned upon if brought up because it's too touchy feely, soft skill hope bullshit. Why would I want to talk about that? I want to talk about the hard skills that are needed to reach our goals. But the hard skills don't matter if no one's heart is in the work. And so you've got to manage hope. It should be the number one concern of every organization that is trying to reach their goals.
And it makes sense like right away, because I'm thinking about it with what you said about like how people who don't have hope like are very um they're not very they're not willing to handle a lot of challenge and things like that. Like they're just like well, compared to someone who has a lot of hope, who is willing to go through challenges and to push things forward.
Hope and
So that's
perseverance
interesting.
are tied together 100%.
Okay, and the last thing is, I told you my podcast is called Coffee Lounge, and so like just to have a question related to the coffee thing is like, what is your favorite coffee? That can be a specific drink, a specific bean, whatever, and like what is the situation in which you like to drink coffee the most, or like a favorite coffee place?
So, first of all, I'm a coffee snob. I have been a coffee snob for a very, very long time. I do not drink at most establishments that people would go to that, as much, listen, unless Starbucks is going to sponsor me, I have nothing nice to say about their coffee.
About them?
It's basically brewed in an ashtray with horrible beans, horrible roasts, and just nothing. It's an insult to actual coffee drinkers. So for me, single origin beans, always, 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 if I possibly can. I prefer Colombian coffee over most anything. Yesterday I had an Ethiopian cup that was through a siphon. So if you've never had a siphon, it's reverse brewed. It brews up and then down, which will give you one of the smoothest cups of coffee you've ever had. But for me, a real true Colombian bean is just for my palate. I really love it. I don't like fruity based beans. I much prefer a darker, earthier blend. I just had some Yemen coffee. If you've never had Yemenese coffee, it is
No, I haven't.
it is very, it's thicker in its texture, almost like a natural flat white, but has twice the caffeine content as normal beans, but very earthy. And you can't drink too much of it. You almost have to have a cortado sort of a much Cuban coffee sort of size of it. Otherwise, you're going to be flying. But the other thing I would tell somebody, if you're truly you want good coffee, you should have an AeroPress contraption that you can buy from the store. It's like $20, but it has won more awards than you could possibly imagine, and it's something that you can take with you on the road, so you can have a good cup of coffee no matter where you are with your little plastic AeroPress machine that is travel ready and worthy of your time.
I usually drink from a French press or a mocha machine, but I like the next thing that I want to buy is like an AeroPress, but I haven't like found the proper one for me. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just start with one from Amazon and then like go from there.
Simple.
So yeah, I appreciate all of this chat. It's been fun. It's been fun also catching up and like learning about the new things that you have been doing and the new frameworks you have been creating to share with the world. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Listen, man, I just want to say I'm a huge fan of you. You know that. I feel like I'm watching you grow up and mature right in front of my eyes. I was impressed with you, 4 or 5 years ago when you were just a teenager trying to figure life out. I am more impressed with you now as you continue to have these journeys and these experiences in your life. You're being deliberate with your intention. That is all that anyone could ask for. You have a learner's heart, which I just love, that you're continuing to try to improve yourself in your life. So listen, I'm your number one fan. I'll be here cheering for you as much as I possibly can. You just keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Brent. No, yeah, and I remember you told me that I need to like you would get mad at me if I didn't like continue like to stay in contact with you. So like, yeah, this is also me staying in contact with you.
Love it. On to the next one, man. I can't wait to do the next one.
Yeah. Thank you.